idea that an America that stands up for democratic values, an America that stands up for pluralism, and it's now turning to an America that stands up for colonialism, right? Land grabs, real estate deals. None of that benefits somebody sitting at home right now. That only benefits the people who are making the real estate deals.
Right. I want to take a listen to the other sound we have of J.D. Vance talking about the threat from within, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America.
One of the things that strikes me about the first piece of sound we played and then that piece of sound is that it sounds innocuous enough if you do not dig into the details and if you're not looking at it. Which shared values are we talking about? So let me pull up this from the Washington Post, which was that Vance met with the leader of a far-right German party, exported the MAGA message. When they say shared values, which values, pray tell,
I wish I was exaggerating when I say Nazi values. Right? I mean, this is the far right party in Germany, which understands what this kind of extremism can lead to. They are not in power right now. And for J.D. Vance to say the will of the people, apparently the will of the people is great when Trump wins in the United States. But he refused to meet with the elected leader of Germany, the German chancellor, and instead goes and meets with this far-right extremist party out of power, saying they're the will of the people. So what he's really presenting for the United States internally and overseas is that the will of the people is white, Christian, male, and willing to fight for that identity.
We'd let that one sit for a little bit, because it's not subtle.
And there's a parallelism between what is happening in Israel and Gaza and what is happening in Ukraine, in the sense that it is one thing to deal with the immediate crisis before us, and it is another thing to actually build an understanding, an infrastructure that guarantees, the understanding there is no guarantee, that we're not back here in 3 to 4 years.
It's called diplomacy, I thought.
Well, it's supposed to be diplomacy, and diplomacy what they used to call the international world order post-World War II. And that is part of what Putin and now Trump are in alliance against all of that. They don't want rules that actually impact all people. We've even had the Secretary of Defense, Hegseth, talk about how, those rules about war crimes, that limits Americans' opportunities to do what they need to do. I'm like, oh, I didn't know we needed to commit war crimes to meet any of our objectives, but okay. Right? They don't want those rules. They want what they decide for themselves is better, and that is a new alliance. That is a new alliance now of the United States and Russia, possibly even some China on the side, but certainly not Europe.
Can I just say this point about Putin and Trump being aligned? When Donald Trump talks about taking Greenland, when he talks about taking Canada, Canada becoming the 51st state, that to me sounds like Vladimir Putin saying he wants Crimea and the parts of Ukraine. Right. This is trampling on what the people will call territorial integrity, but like not respecting the sovereignty of people's borders is something that dictators do. It's something that authoritarians do. It's not something I thought that Americans and American presidents and people who believe in democracy do. But that's why it's not a joke when he talks about Canada being the 51st state. It's actually a threat, a huge threat.
And it's laying the groundwork for this idea that America itself now will become a new imperial country, and that people want that.
Talk all we want about values. Values are important. But you can't shoot values. You can't shoot flags, and you can't shoot strong speeches.
You can't, shoot with them? Or you can't shoot at them? You can't shoot. Are we sure he's not talking about, shots? You know what I mean? U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth at a meeting of the NATO defense ministers this week. I think that was supposed to sound tough, came off a little more like something your least favorite uncle posts on Facebook next to a picture of an assault rifle and 9 empty beer cans. But Secretary Hegseth began this trip by bewildering not just our allies, but also a lot of people in Washington when he inexplicably blurted out that any peace deal in the Russia-Ukraine war would have to include Ukraine giving up its territory and abandoning its bid to join NATO. That would imply that the peace talks are have already happened, and Ukraine already had to give everything up. Why would they talk? We mentioned last night that Secretary Hegseth has now tried to walk those comments back. But I think it is worth you hearing exactly how he started his remarks when he was trying to take back what he said the other day.
As it pertains to NATO membership not being realistic outcome for negotiations, that's something that was stated as part of my remarks here, as part of the coordination with how we're executing these ongoing negotiations.
That was, can you say that again? Can we diagram that sentence? That's something that was stated as part of my remarks. It's like he asked ChatGPT to come up with the most passive voice way to say, you know what, I need to take back that dumb thing I said. It's not just our allies abroad who reacted negatively to Pete Hegseth's comments. After Hegseth made those comments, the Republican chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Senator Roger Wicker, responded by saying, quote, "I'd prefer we don't give away negotiating positions before we actually get started." After Hegseth then tried to take it back, walk back what he'd said and say he didn't really mean it, Senator Wicker then responded again, saying, quote, "He made a rookie mistake. I don't know who wrote the speech. It's the kind of thing Tucker Carlson could have written. And, quote, Carlson is a fool," said the senator. Again, that is a member of Pete Hegseth's own political party boldly criticizing his performance on this trip. It's worth noting, as Senator Wicker was making that unfavorable comparison to Mr. Carlson himself was posting a new interview with Hungary's authoritarian leader, Viktor Orban, an interview where, as Politico puts it, quote, "Orban repeated Kremlin talking points that Russia invaded Ukraine in a bid to stop it from joining NATO." Because, yes, Russia was on the ropes. They were the real victim here. They just had to invade. Meanwhile, today, Ukraine accused Russia's military of ramming a drone with a high explosive warhead on it into the former Chernobyl nuclear site. The drone reportedly damaged the protective shield that is supposed to prevent radiation leaks from that famously radioactive site. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the damage was significant, but he says there are not currently signs of increased radiation. Amid all of this, the Vice President of the United States managed to make things even more confusing, making his own sort of rookie moves on his own first trip abroad. He told the Wall Street Journal that the U.S. would potentially take military action in the war in Ukraine. As in, U.S. troops in Ukraine? Everybody in this administration seems to be taking the approach that they should just say whatever pops into their head and try cleaning it up later. Vice President Vance said that the Wall Street Journal had twisted his words. The Wall Street Journal does not appear to have conceded they've done any such thing. Joining us now from Munich, Germany, is former ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, who has stayed up till dark 30 to be with us tonight in the middle of the night. Sir, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure to be on with you, Rachel.
These remarks from Pete Hegseth at the outset here, speaking with NATO leaders, were obviously not just damaging, but embarrassing, and he then tried to take them back. We're in sort of a different situation with remarks that have since been made there by Vice President Vance. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about Vice President Vance's speech there and how it was received.
Well, first, it was just a rookie mistake is very generous. I've negotiated with the Russians before. They're tough negotiators, and you don't just capitulate and give them what they want before you start the negotiations. And the vice president could have clarified things today at the Munich Security Conference. He could have devoted his speech to saying what the United States position is, what the Trump administration official position is to try to clean it up. But instead, he gave a speech about how democracy is failing in Europe. He said that that was a bigger threat to Europe than Russia or China. And he said that in a room filled with generals and admirals and Ukrainian soldiers. And again, I don't need to tell you, Rachel, the irony of the vice president of the United States who works for President Trump telling the Europeans that they're doing a bad job at democracy, given what we are going through right now and given what we went through 4 years ago, really was quite insulting for this audience. So it was just it was a great opportunity to say clearly what their position was, and instead he chose to lecture them about democracy.
I also understand that Vice President Vance made the decision in Germany at this meeting to not meet with the German chancellor and instead to meet with the leaders of Germany's far-right party, AfD, which is viewed by many Germans as the sort of unsettling inheritors of the legacy of the Nazi Party, frankly. What do you make of this decision? Is this a logistics decision or is this a loud message? And if so, how is it being heard?
Definitely not a logistics decision problem. Anybody that the vice president wanted to meet with, he could. But it underscores the other message of his speech. His speech was basically adopt our interpretation of values, right? MAGA values. And again, these guys, there's a big contradiction. They talk about sovereignty all the time, but when it comes to German sovereignty, they're perfectly willing to get involved. There's elections here in just a few days here in Germany. And it was not well received. I've been to this.
So, folks, do you notice how all of this kicked off at a certain point when Canada started fighting back? Canada and Mexico, to be fair. But the world really started to notice just how awful this was going to be, even in relation to Trump 2016, like the first Trump administration. As bad as that was for America's global relationships in the military, in security, in trade, diplomacy, all of that, it's gotten worse. Much worse than expected, much quicker than expected. And it was Canada who blew the whistle on Trump. Because Canada didn't back down and instead fought back. Again, almost all of Canada, with exception of our Maple MAGAs. We do have our Maple MAGAs, but they are a small part of the population. The entirety of the progressive wing of the country, like the NDP, the center-right liberals, and even some conservatives. But not all conservatives, but even some conservatives have been speaking out. And Canada put the United States on the back foot. First of all, getting Trump to temporarily back down on tariffs, eliminate some of the tariffs because he knew they would be damaging for the U.S. economy. He slashed the oil tariff. And now it sent Vance and Hegseth into a scramble, and all they've done is piss off America's allies. So let this be a reminder that Canada was the one that pulled the mask off. And now the rest of the world is seeing something they wouldn't have if Canada just bent the knee like Trump was expecting.